For centuries, these cities have weathered everything history threw at them, from devastating wars to economic depressions and endless generational shifts. Yet, it took only 3 days for water to bring them to a complete and total halt. Southern France was battered by over 12 inches of rain, a deluge that caused local rivers to quietly but relentlessly swell until they simply overpowered everything in their path. We're talking about streets, power grids, and transportation networks, all failing under the pressure. It didn't happen with explosions or a dramatic crash. It was just water, steady, heavy, and rising much faster than anyone anticipated. In historic hubs like Montpellier and the medieval village of Sommières, the ancient stone streets effectively turned into canals. Cars were abandoned where they stood, while emergency crews watched river gauges hit levels we haven't seen in more than 30 years. This wasn't your typical flash flood that strikes and vanishes. It was something far more unsettling, a slow-motion crisis that crept in overnight. It laid bare a harsh reality. Even our most enduring cities are incredibly vulnerable when the weather stops behaving the way history says it should. Now, as the waters finally start to pull back, we're left with a lingering question. If cities built to survive for centuries can be overtaken in just a few days, what does that signal for the rest of us? To really understand why this flooding in southern France caused such chaos so quickly, we have to look past the storm itself and understand the DNA of these cities. Places like Montpellier and Sommières were mapped out hundreds of years ago, long before we had modern meteorology, electrical grids, or flood control science. Back then, living next to the river wasn't a risk. It was a strategic advantage. The water was a lifeline. It offered trade routes, fresh water, fertile soil, and natural defense against enemies. These towns were actually designed to coexist with seasonal flooding, not to block it out entirely. That's why you see those stone streets sloping gently toward the riverbanks. They were built to handle the water, not to fight it. Back then, drainage channels were basic, narrow ditches built to handle a modest rise in water levels, nothing more. The floodplains did the rest of the work, soaking up the overflow naturally. Residents lived with the expectation that the river would jump its banks every now and then, and eventually, it would recede. But here is what these cities were never designed to handle: extreme, sustained rainfall. We are talking about the kind of storm that dumps over 12 inches of water in just 3 days. Modern development has actually made this harder to manage. We've narrowed the river corridors, replaced spongy soil with concrete pavement, and packed vital infrastructure right into the danger zones. Today, electrical substations, major roads, and underground utility pipes sit in low-lying areas that used to flood safely without hurting anyone. In medieval towns like Sommières, the challenge is even trickier. Strict historic preservation rules limit how much you can change the riverbanks or widen the drainage walls. You have ancient bridges, stone embankments, and centuries-old buildings sitting exactly where the floodwaters want to go. The very architecture that gives these towns their charm is exactly what locks them into this vulnerability. This flood didn't expose a failure of planning. It exposed a collision between ancient design and our modern reality. These cities were built to last for generations, but they are now being tested by weather extremes that hit faster, last longer, and push the rivers far beyond anything the original builders could have ever imagined. What made this event so dangerous wasn't just the intensity of the rain, it was the duration. It simply refused to stop. In southern France, this storm didn't roar in with dramatic lightning or violent winds. Instead, it just parked itself over the region. It rained steadily, hour after hour, day after day. By the time the system finally broke up, some areas had recorded more than 12 inches of rain in just 72 hours. That is roughly an entire season's worth of water falling in a single weekend. For those of you watching in the US, this pattern is very similar to an atmospheric river stalling out over California or a moisture-heavy system getting stuck over the Mississippi Valley. The real danger here isn't instantaneous flash flooding. It's the slow, creeping accumulation. At first, the rivers seem calm. The streets just look wet, totally manageable. But then, without any warning, the drainage systems hit their limit, and the landscape simply runs out of room to hold the water. Once the ground is fully saturated, every single new drop of rain turns instantly into runoff. Hills act like funnels, sending water rushing into the valleys. Small streams balloon into fast-moving channels. The larger rivers might react slower, But once they start rising, there is no stopping them. By the time communities realize how bad it is, their escape routes are already disappearing. Meteorologists warned early on that this wasn't going to be a typical storm. It was a perfect storm setup, warm Mediterranean air meeting a slow-moving weather pattern, locked in place by the local geography. The forecast models offered zero relief, signaling that the rivers would keep rising even after the heaviest rain eased up. This kind of event really challenges how we perceive risk. We are trained to look out for violent, loud storms, not the quiet ones that build danger gradually. In southern France, the rain didn't announce itself as a disaster. It just kept falling, completely rewriting the rules of safety that residents thought they knew. Rivers are often the most underestimated threat in these long-duration events, and this flood showed us exactly why. Unlike a flash flood that strikes with sudden violence, these rivers rise quietly, almost deceptively. In this region, two main rivers, the Hérault and the Vidourle, gave residents a false sense of time. They looked manageable 1 minute, then crossed dangerous thresholds the next. Take the Hérault River. It's wider and usually moves slower, so it absorbed the rainfall gradually at first. The rise seemed controlled, almost routine. But as the runoff from the soaked hillsides kept pouring in, the river hit levels we haven't seen in over 3 decades, pushing right past flood defenses that were never built for this kind of sustained pressure. By the time the danger was obvious, the surrounding streets and infrastructure were already underwater. The Vidourle River, on the other hand, is a different beast entirely. It's short, steep, and reacts fast. It has a reputation for sudden surges during heavy rain. Locals even have a name for it. But even experience can be misleading. When rain piles up upstream, this river can jump several feet in just a matter of hours. In the town of Sommières, that rapid rise left almost no margin for error, especially in the narrow streets of the historic district. What makes these rivers especially dangerous is the delay between cause and effect. The rain might slow down or even stop, but the rivers will keep rising long after, as all that water drains down from the mountains and valleys. This lag creates a dangerous gap between what people see and what is actually happening. It's easy to assume the worst is over just as the water levels are about to hit their peak. That's exactly why emergency officials keep their eyes glued to the river gauges. They treat the water level as the final, absolute truth. During this event, those gauges told a sobering story. The danger wasn't ending just because the rain stopped. In fact, it was only just beginning. In disasters like this, rivers don't make an announcement. They just arrive, reshaping the city before most people even realize what's going on. Every major crisis has a tipping point, that moment where normal quietly stops working. In southern France, that moment hit when the water crossed invisible but critical lines. We didn't see roads crumbling into the earth or buildings suddenly collapsing. Instead, the systems that keep a city alive, transportation, electricity, emergency access, just started shutting down one by one. As the river spilled over, streets that were open a few hours earlier became completely impassable. Public transit slowed to a crawl and then halted entirely as water pooled over tracks and roadways. Underpasses turned into dangerous traps, forcing officials to seal off entire neighborhoods to keep cars from being swept away. Suddenly, movement itself was the risk. The power grid took a major hit too. Substations and underground equipment in the low-lying zones were submerged, cutting the lights for thousands of homes. And once the water touches that high-voltage gear, there is no quick fix. Repair crews couldn't safely go in until the water receded, creating a dangerous waiting game where outages spread just as emergency resources were being stretched thin. For the first responders, the hardest challenge was knowing when not to act. Firefighters and police are trained to run toward danger, but floodwaters draw a hard line in the sand. You can't drive a rescue truck into flowing water without risking it stalling or flipping over. You can't rush into a flooded building without endangering both the residents and the rescuers. In many cases, teams had to hold their position, watch the water, and make the incredibly difficult choice to wait. It feels counterintuitive, but that restraint often saves lives. This phase of the flood revealed a critical truth. Disasters aren't always chaotic explosions. Sometimes they are slow, methodical breakdowns where your infrastructure hits its limit and the smartest move is to pause. In southern France, that discipline is exactly what prevented a tragedy, even as the cities temporarily surrendered control to the water surrounding them. And given the sheer scale of this flooding, one fact stands out above the rest. There were 0 reported fatalities. The fact that everyone made it out alive wasn't just luck. It was the result of preparation, deep experience, and the public making the right moves at the right time. Southern France has lived with flood risks for generations, and that history dictated exactly how authorities and residents reacted when the weather started to turn. Early warnings were a game-changer here. Meteorological services pushed out alerts well before the rivers peaked, giving local governments a head start to trigger their response plans and get clear information out to the public. Residents were told to stay off the roads, stay away from the riverbanks, and take the rising water seriously. And crucially, they listened. In disasters like this, simply following instructions is often the difference between a major inconvenience and a total catastrophe. The nature of the flood itself also played a role. While the water levels were historically high, in many areas, the rise was gradual enough to give people a window to escape. Precautionary evacuations in the low-lying zones helped get the most vulnerable people, like the elderly and those with limited mobility, out of harm's way early. Emergency services focused on prevention rather than high-stakes drama, guiding people to safety before the situation became critical. The community stepped up, too. Neighbors checked on neighbors, shared updates, and helped those in need before conditions got too bad. This informal network filled the gaps that official services couldn't reach immediately. In towns used to flooding, experience took the place of panic. Now, the lack of fatalities doesn't take away from how serious this event was. Homes were damaged, businesses were shut down, and lives were turned upside down. But it does offer a powerful lesson. Disasters don't have to claim lives to be devastating. With the right preparation, communication, and discipline, even severe floods can be managed without the worst-case scenario coming true. As the water slowly pulls back from the streets of southern France, the physical damage will take weeks, maybe months, to repair. But beyond the cleanup, this flood leaves us with a much deeper question. How do our cities, both the ancient and the modern, face a future shaped by weather extremes that are becoming more frequent and more intense? What we saw in France isn't just a local headline. It's a global wake-up call. It reminds us that as rainfall patterns shift and rivers start behaving unpredictably, communities all over the world are facing the exact same test. Can we adapt faster than the water rises? If you found this analysis helpful or if it made you think, please hit that like button and share this video with anyone interested in extreme weather or climate risks. Your support is what helps us get this content out to more people who want to understand the how and why behind these disasters. Now, I want to turn the question over to you. Do you believe our cities are actually ready for floods that break all the historical rules? Or are we still designing for the past instead of the future? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into major weather events and the real stories behind them.